So let's start by reading from the scripture. I'm going to read from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 6 to 10. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 6 to 10. Therefore, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, in which you will not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Father, loving God, you are a God of promise. You promise a land for Israel, for Palestinians, for every single human being on this earth. As we saw from last week, you are involved in the history of many other nations outside the traditional boundaries of Judeo-Christian culture and understanding. But as Christians, you have also promised us a land, the kingdom of God, which is already existing among us. It may not be a physical land, but it's a land of pure joy, love, and devotion to you. And thank you for making us citizens of the kingdom of God. In Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the concept of the promised land, which is the center of the conflict that is unfolding in front of us, right? So this is a small piece of land right in the middle of your map, which is claimed as holy land by three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the promised land by two people groups. They both consider that land is given to them. You know, they have that claim. Now, before getting there, I just want to clarify a couple of concepts. I had some intelligence questions after the question hour last week, so I wanted to clarify if that is still in your mind, because it's sort of a recap. And I said there is a difference between equality and hierarchy. That's very difficult for people to understand. That I said everybody, every people group, like Indians and Italians and Jewish, all are equal in the eyes of God, and all are somehow included in the covenant which we read in Genesis chapter 12. But there is a hierarchy in the way it is being dispensed. Because the Jewish people have given a responsibility, and because they have given a responsibility, they have more privilege than other people, because it's a functional thing. There's a difference between a qualitative. Equality is a qualitative thing. It's a qualitative thing. We are equal. But hierarchy is a functional thing. You know, to actually, like, you know, when you go on a plane, they say if the oxygen mask drops, they say first you wear the mask before you help your wife or child. It doesn't matter whoever's sitting next to you. That doesn't mean my child is not important to me or my wife is not important to me. Actually, I would really like to help my wife or my child before I help myself. That's the heroic nature in all of us. But they are saying that that's not a good idea, because in that way you will end up, all of you might end up being dead, right? Because it's a functional thing to do that first. But that doesn't negate the equality or even higher level of hierarchy you have your wife or a kid. So you have to really get that concept. It's the same thing again. I don't want to go into this, but the husband-wife concept, they are both equal qualitatively for God. Man and woman are both equal. They should be treated as such. But functionally, there is a hierarchy. Now, that is the difference. I just want you to get that concept because very important. And another thing I said is Israel. When you hear the word Israel, it is at the same time, it is a land, a physical land called Israel, like we call India. And it is also a state of governance, like, it's a state of Israel. But more importantly, Israel is also a people group, to whom God has given the covenant. So you say, whether they are pure Jews, whether Ashkenazis or, Sephardim, that's not the point. The point is that God is speaking to a people group whom he has chosen with a specific assignment and given a specific task, and thus for that task he has also given them responsibility. So I just want you to know that. So, today, like I said, we are getting into some kind of a geopolitical issues, not so much from the Bible. So this is where everything is going to get tricky, right? Some of the things that I say may not be the same thing you read in different media, because history of a nation can be very, very subjective, okay? So I thought it's a good idea for me to do something which I believe that I'm an expert at and probably you know nothing about, but it is equally fascinating and eerily similar to what we are going to discuss today, okay? So this is a minor diversion, but promise you this will be very, very important. So this is a piece of land I'm very familiar called India, okay? This is 1947 India, okay? At that time, the British ruled India. In the First World War, during that time, it was the Ottoman Turkish dynasty, most of the world. And then during the Second World War, British were prominent, but 1947, the British decided to leave India, right? So they decided to give the land back to Indians, but who are Indians? Nobody really knows. See, this is the origin of nation states. We always think about, this is our country. Back in the days, in the recent history, the nation state was not emerged. Before that, it was all kings and kingdoms, emperors and empire. It's not like we had a formal countries with borderline and state of governance and the ambassador. This is a very different picture. Anyway, before the British decided to leave the Indian subcontinent, they decided to give the land to people, but the people of the land said, we need this, we need that. So a group of Muslims, Muslims always believe in their purity and they want to have an Islamic kingdom, because without Islamic kingdom, because their religion is inherently tied to the land. And Islam to be exercised in its purest form, the Sharia law, they have to have their own land. So they said, we need an Islamic republic. But India is predominantly Hindu religion, right? And so British came up with this plan, they're kind of confused about all of this, right? So they came up with this land plan that red kind of color goes to Hindustan. Stan is a word for place. You hear Afghanistan or Hindustan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, which really means a land. That particular suffix means land, okay? So they decided the central major part will go to Hindus, because they couldn't divide by people group. It's not just the Arabs and Israelis. India has so many different people group, So they decided to divide it by religion. So the central major part will go to people who follow Hinduism. And then two sides. On one side, the left side is Pakistan. Pak means pure. That's what it means. They wanted a pure land to practice Islam, right? So the left top corner goes to Muslims. It will be an Islamic republic. Same way, the right side also goes to Islamic republic. That's where the East and West Pakistan. So East and West Pakistan, Hindustan, which is India, right in the middle, and there is tiny blue dot is called Khalistan. That is a word in Punjabi, that also means pure land. Now, these people practice a religion called Sikhism. Some of you know, they wear turban and they look very much like Muslims, but it's a different religion, right? So they said they need their own land. So these three different, so the British came up with this idea, and then they just left the land to, okay, now you guys figure it out, and they just left the land. What else can they do, right? Now imagine somebody saying that, okay, all the Californians, you all move to Texas. Okay? And the Texas people, you all moved to California or New York, right? You figure it out, right? Can you imagine what kind of chaos will happen? So the Hindus from Pakistan area were supposed to come back to the orange or the orange area, and the Muslims in the orange area were supposed to go to the green area, either east or west. There are no police. There are no rule book. There is no land claim. So people had to figure it out, right? So as a reason, the lot of, nobody reads about it because we are obsessed with what is happening in the Middle East. These kind of things happen in the world on a regular basis, okay? So especially at that time area. So there is this big displacement of people. People going from India to Pakistan, not knowing because Muslims are going to Pakistan, but the Hindus push them out from India to Pakistan. In the same way, the Muslims push the Hindus out to India. So this chaos happened. Millions of people displaced. There are communal violence, rape, murder. A series of violence erupted, right? Now, that we'll say that's history, right? But not that long ago, 1947. 1947, August 15th is when India got its independence. India declared as a republic. Now, this is India. So I put that map on to your right and the current India's map on your left. Now, if you really look at that map, first of all, you see, let me talk about Pakistan a little bit. So what happened was, right after that, there was confusion. 1947, India declares independence. 1948 onwards, India and Pakistan starts dispute, war, and wars being raged, right? And so there were many wars, particularly the place of dispute is in the top. When you really look at India's map, you can see India claims the whole head. So India is almost like a dancing girl, kind of, right? That's the way India is positioned. But Pakistanis say, but that is not how India was originally envisioned. You can see half of that head belongs to Pakistan. Now that place is called Kashmir. Kashmir. Some of you wear Kashmir, very expensive clothing. It comes from a specific kind of goats. The wool that comes from a specific kind of goats that is being fed or brought up in that area, Kashmir. It's a very, very beautiful place. So there is a dispute between India and Pakistan for the land of Kashmir. So the land of Kashmir is our Palestine, okay? We are waging wars, even today as we speak. That particular land is a disputed territory. So we had wars in the 1940s, 1960s, even as late as to late 1990s, there was almost a war. But 1970s, there was a war in which East Pakistan and West Pakistan kind of fought against each other. Because they are still under one governance, but they are in two different places, as you can see. Right? So India used this as an opportunity, right, to meddle with this. I mean, this is my interpretation. So India really helped East Pakistan to liberate themselves from the West Pakistan. So the East Pakistan is now called Bangladesh. You know the country Bangladesh? It was actually East Pakistan. Now it is two different countries. India is right in the middle, okay? Now picture Israel right in the middle between Gaza on one side and West Bank on another side. And you will see a lot of parallels here. It is almost fascinating. But again, the territory dispute is still ongoing about that land of Kashmir. Nobody is right, nobody is wrong. Everybody has their right to say. Pakistan say, we own that land. India says, we own that land. It's an ongoing fight, right? So then as a part of this happened in 1992. This is a group of Hindu extremists basically destroying a Muslim mosque in India called Babari Masjid. They say this is built in our holy land. This is a place called Ayodhya where they believe one of their mythical heroes or their gods, Rama, was born. So we will not allow a mosque to be built in our holy land. They destroyed right in front of television camera. They just destroyed that mosque, the Hindu extremists. And Muslims, they know it's a tit for tat, right? So this is called Taj Mahal. This is not the real Taj Mahal. This is one of the luxurious hotels in India called Taj Mahal. And this is as recent as 2008, the terrorist attack in Taj Mahal Hotel, which anyway killed a lot of people and all that. What I meant is there is this ongoing clash between India and Pakistan for this little piece of land called Kashmir, among other things, because of the border crisis. All eventually happened because of the land redistribution. After the World War I and II, there is no specific criteria. Nobody has figured this out. So if you ask me whether there will be peace between India and Pakistan, the honest answer is no. There will not be. There will not be any reconciliation because history is subject to interpretation. The same history what I told you, a Pakistani told you the same thing, he or she might have a completely different way of saying that, even though there is a fact, right? So, but this is the one thing I want you to remember. We have to accept the fact that certain things, there is no solution. There is no solution. Let's not try to solve the problem. All we can do is manage the problem. Manage the problem. That's very different from solving. See, quite often we have this utopian vision, especially the people in the Western world. We think everything can be solved by negotiation and, all that kind of, which is God bless us for thinking that way. But sometimes the utopian visions can only create more and more disaster, which you'll come to know eventually, right? So the best way we can look at some of this thing is to accept the reality. I mean, that's the biblical reality. Man, unless Jesus established the Messianic kingdom, don't even think that there is going to be peace between whether it is India and Pakistan or Israel and Palestine or blacks and whites or, there is no peace. I'm sorry to break this out to you, but we can manage it. We can manage it. So that should be the best possible solution, right? So I just want you to know that. So this is one thing I want you to remember. If you forget everything I'm going to teach you today, I want you to remember this thing. See, it's basically 9 dots, right? Connecting the dots. You all played connecting the dot games, right? So you're just given this 9 dots. This is how you study history, right? You can take that 9 dots and create different pictures with that. One person took that 9 dots and they created a house. And another person took the same 9 dots and created a fish, which are completely different entities or different beings, right? Because history is a set of facts, but the interpretations of that fact. History is a series of events, but and perceptions of that event. Does that make sense? So you say, oh, it's a historical fact. Yeah, it's a historical fact. You're saying there are dots, right? I'm not saying that this is a blank canvas with no dots. There are dots. There are something. The fact that there was the October 7, kidnapping happened. People are being kidnapped. People were kidnapped, and the attack happened. People died is a fact. Nobody can change that fact. But why that happened? Could that be done differently? Now, that's the interpretation comes in, right? So I just want you to be aware of the fact that political history is a subjective reality, depending on where you hear it, right? So I just want you to be very, very aware of that. So what I did was for this session, like I said in the last class, I always, as a research scholar, I always admit my bias. And in the last class, I admitted my bias. If I have a bias, even if I try to wipe off all my bias, I might have a pro-Israeli bias because, well, I'm a Christian, but I can just get away from that. But I was also born as an Indian. The Indians were always sort of pro-Israeli. Not always, but there was that, like I said, I had Jewish friends and all that. So I might have that bias, right? So what I did was, for all the rest of the slides, my data comes from Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera network is a Qatari network, which is very Islamic. I mean, that's all, as far as you can go, legitimate Islamic, because last Sunday there was a gentleman who was very upset at me, and he said, well, not in a bad way, but he said that Nazi symbol I showed you at USC and UCLA, he said that was drawn by Jewish people, just to provoke, right? Now, this, you can come, maybe they were, but if you're going to interpret all of this that way, then there is not going to be an end, right? There's not going to be an end. That's why these things will not have an end. So you can think whatever you want to think, you can feel whatever you want to feel, but I'm only talking about the dots and also the reality. Some of these realities I'm taking from Al Jazeera because I think that's as far as I can go. If I go too much, that becomes conspiracy theory, right? If I say it was the Jewish people who drew that, then it's borderline conspiracy theory, because unless I have literally seen a Jewish person drawing it, right? Anyway, all that to say, I'm trying to be a little pro-Islamic, just to balance my own research. I'm just saying that. So most of it comes from Al Jazeera network and their resources, okay? Let me look at time, okay. So the land of Philistines, right? You know the name Palestine means the land of Philistines. Now this name was given by Roman Emperor Hadrian. AD 70, something very cataclysmic happened in Jewish history. The Romans came and basically destroyed Jerusalem and wiped out. They wanted to wipe out Israel as a nation, dispersed from them. And then the next emperor who came was Hadrian. Is that his Emperor Hadrian? And he wanted to basically finish the process by changing the name of the land to the land of Philistines. Right? And this is kind of an act of colonialization because there are no Philistines per se. Nobody, even Palestinians, will call them, we are the Philistines or something like that. Because there are a lot of biblical people like Jebusites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Philistines, and we read in the Bible, none of them really exist. None of them really exist. Basically, in the same name, right? The same name we can track is the Egyptians and the Jewish people, right? So he gave them the name Philistines because Philistines were the arch nemesis of the Jewish people, and he basically assigned that. So that the name means, which is also a little, because the name Philistine itself means, like the actual etymology of that word is the people of the sea. So they believe that the word is Philistine. Philistim means roll or invade. So it is believed the Philistines, at least in the Bible story, are the invaders who came through the sea, Mediterranean Sea, from other islands, Greek islands, and they occupied that place. And in the biblical stories, they were always portrayed as adversaries, right? The David and Goliath story, the famous story, Goliath was a Philistine, right? And in the Samson and Delilah story, and Delilah was not his wife, Delilah was not necessarily a Philistine, we don't know, but Samson was married to a Philistine woman, right? Like, so Philistines appear in that. In all of that, they don't have a good positive connotation anyway. And Gaza in particular is mentioned in the Bible multiple times. And when you read, for example, Joshua 13:3, it describes the 5 kingdoms or 5 princes of Philistines. One of them is Gaza, right? So Gaza is right from the, so it's one of the ancient people group or the cities or the land, right? So it is a very small strip of land. I've never been to Gaza, but obviously I read about it. It says it's roughly 25 miles in length, and at the widest part, it is only 7 miles wide. It's just almost like a big beach here. That's the way it sounds. But obviously, it is so important. Now, here is the origin of nation states. Like I said, I want you to picture, this is right after the First World War, right? The biggest empire, the Ottoman Empire, is destroyed, right? Destroyed. And now they're trying to figure out how we are going to divide this land. Right? It's one thing to say, oh yeah, the British won the war and they took the land. It's much easier to read it, but the actual process is not that simple, right? At that time, the whole place was occupied by the Ottoman Ottoman Empire, right? It was a Turkish dynasty. Now the British and the French, they took over. This is right in the end of the World War I. So this is called Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916. So what happens is, at this point, the British and the French realize they are going to win the war. Okay. Now, when we win the war, let's have an agreement, right? Like, don't go and take our land. So let's divide this land between us. Let's be friends here. So they made a secret treaty. This was a secret treaty, because they knew they are going to win the war. Then again, we don't know, there are no rules like this back in the days, right? So they operate by thumb rule. For example, so if the French outpost is in a particular space, by the time the war is over, then they occupy that land from here onwards, right? These are all allied forces and all that. So, but if British outpost is on particular area, then they occupy the land. So there are a lot of guessing games and, things are happening. It's not as we think straightforward as it is. Anyway, the point is that Palestine and the surrounding area were going to be under the control of French and the British. So they came up with this agreement according to which how to redistribute the power and the land. So here you can see the blue area are French, light blue because lighter French influence. Again, nobody has marked territories, right? But the army controlled that part, and the real blue is, the dark blue is the real control, the same way the British on the red, right? So you can see that Palestine area was kind of a light blue because everybody, and a mix of red and light blue, right? Like, everybody wanted that place, not necessarily because of that. That was a good point to control the trading through Suez Canal, right? Anyway, that was interesting. So this was the rough agreement they formed to divide the land between the British and the French, right? 1916 secret agreement. Then 1917, a year later, the British officially declare victory against the Ottoman Empire. This is called Balfour Declaration. You probably heard about that. Balfour Declaration. British officially captured Palestine and from the Ottoman Empire, right? Now, so now sort of British on the land at this point, 1917. Now comes the tricky part. Now, this is a very controversial person called Theodore Herzl. He is considered the father of the modern Zionist movement. Zionist movement, simply put, is that they believe that the Jewish people have a right of land to that area, right? Which is a very tricky thing to say. Yeah, of course they do. I mean, they are the only people group who still live in that area. We know the British, the Davidic dynasty to Abraham, nobody dispute the history. But the question is, do they have the right of return at this point to that land because our ancestors once owned it? Now, this is where you move from dot to the line, how you are going to draw the line, right? It's a matter of perception. I'll just give you an example. You go to your nice, beautiful house in Pasadena or San Gabriel or San Marino, then you see a Native American family standing at your backyard. And they say, well, our ancestors owned the land, right? Which nobody dispute. Nobody disputed, right? Nobody disputed. So sorry guys, you may have to move, or we may have to decide to divide the land. So let us take 2 bedrooms, and you can just take 1 bedroom. No, I'm just asking you a hypothetical scenario, right? You know what I mean? So this is where it gets tricky. Aren't they right? You know, don't they own the land? Or didn't they own the land? Don't they have a right to this land? Don't they have the right to come back to that land? Yes. But should they do it right now? No, I don't care. I don't own any land here. I still keep living. We are still in a rental residence, so I will enjoy the fun if something like that has happened, right? So you need to put this into context, right? Like, you know, so this is where the confusion happens. But the Zionism is founded on the assumption that the Jewish people has a right of return to their land, which, depending on your persuasion, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but that is the reality of it. Now, but on the other side, my pro-Jewish side, I would say, now this is an important thing I want you to know. See, we always say that, you know, the Nazis were the anti-Semite, the Nazis. You know, that is so inaccurate, because, not inaccurate, Nazis were not the only anti-Semites. Pretty much all the medieval Europe were anti-Semite, or they all hated Jews. And Jews in the medieval Europe didn't even have the right to own their land. You know, they wouldn't sell land to the Jews. So they couldn't do any agriculture. So they ended up becoming traders. Right? That's why Jewish people sort of, you probably know the story of the Merchant of Venice, the Shylock. And these are caricature versions of Jewish traders. You know, they were demonized, caricature version as this people who make money. And they became like that because they couldn't own the land. They couldn't do any agriculture. So they had to trade the land. I've heard the same stories about Hollywood. Back in the day, I've heard now the Hollywood is considered a Jewish town. Everybody said Jews on the media. Why? Because what I heard is when the Jews started coming to this country, nobody gave them a job. All they could do was being street side performers. They became performers, you know, whether it's juggling, whether it's singing or dancing, and which was considered very, very low grade thing at the time by the traditional Americans. But now the table has turned. Now that has become the big thing. They own it. But that's the destiny that favors some people some way. So I want you to be very clear. So when the Israelites, when they say, we want to go back to our native land, one way to think about it is as Zionist project of going and occupying the land, like I said, like the Native Americans coming back to take the land. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is they want to live somewhere because they are being continuously persecuted by people everywhere they go. They were always considered outsiders. So it could also be, you can have a sympathetic side to that, why the Zionist movement was founded. Again, it depends on how you draw the line. But the fact remains the same. Theodor Herzl initiated the Zionist project where they wanted to have this land, and his first, that particular picture I've shown is the state, the Jewish state, the pamphlet he published. I think it was somewhere in 1896. 1896 he published this pamphlet. This is the birth of the modern Zionist movement of going back to their native land. Again, you can connect the dots, but these are the dots, right? Here is the Al Jazeera statistics on the Jewish immigration. The Jews started migrating right from 1920s that time. Before that, there were only around 6% or so Jews there in the Palestine land, but there was a mass migration. The Jewish people were migrating to Palestine and living there, getting mixed with the native Jewish population. According to them, as you can see, it went up and up. Now comes to a very important part, 1937. Now again, I want you to compare this to what I was saying about India. This is all what is happening in India. This is happening almost at the same place. 1937, 1947, India gets independence. 1948, Israel. So this is not an isolated event. This is happening everywhere. I don't know about Lebanon, Syria. All these countries are forming as nation state in some way during that period. So this is not just an Israel issue. This is a general. We had to put it in the wider context, right? So here is something called the Peel Commission. So Peel Commission is essentially the British way of, again, getting out of India, right? Like that, they want to get out of Palestine. The only thing they are interested is Jerusalem and that area because it's Holy Land, and also they can control. They need to have some control of the Suez Canal for their trading, right? Now, they want to get out of the land, so they kept promising people, depending on, in the war, there is issues of duplicity, and there are also issues of expediency. Right? They want to fight the Turks, right? I mean, the UK or the French, the forces cannot just fight the Turks by themselves. So they will go to Arabs and they'll say, if you fight with us, Arabs hated the Turks too, even though they are all Muslims, right? It's a people group clash. If you fight with us, we will give you your own land. They will say that to the Arabs, right? And then they will go to the Jews and say, if you fight with us, we will give you the land. That's the way war works, right? The expediency happens, So they did this kind of solution. At the end of the day, they found themselves in a big mess. And they said, okay, we have promised Arabs and we have also promised the Jews. So we need to divide this land into two. So this is the Peel Commission division. And the Arabs didn't like it. The Arabs said, we don't want two states. We want one Palestine state. You probably heard about the river to the sea, right? With this Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. We want only one state. It can be a self-governing nation. To their credit, they were not asking for an Islamic republic or anything. We want one state where whether there can be Jews or Muslims, that's a different thing. One state, self-governing. But the Jews insisted. Obviously, they have their own right to insist. And the British said, okay, we are going to do exactly what we did in India, or what we are going to do in India. We want to get out of this mess. Here, a piece of land for Jews. Here is a piece of land for Arabs. And now, you figure it out, right? Let's get out of here. So that's really what's happening here. So this is the one other reason I gave you that particular story before. So they came up with this Peel Commission, and they did this two-state solution as a declaration, right? Declaration is not a treaty, which really means this is, as British, we find this is the way to be done, and we don't really need your opinion. We don't need your feedback, right? So Arabs never agreed to it, right? So then it comes to UN, 1947, again, the same time frame. It comes to UN Partition Plan, Resolution 181, where this becomes official. By this time, as you can see, the blue is the Jewish part, and the green is the Arab part, and the little in the middle, Jerusalem, will be international controlled by an international body, because that's a special place, right? So this comes to the resolution, as you can see, 33 people voted, 13 against. Actually, India voted against it. India voted against the formation of Israel as a state. But based on the majority, and Israel declared itself as a state. And most of you know, May 14, 1948, based on the US resolution, in my opinion, they have every right, and they formed this state. That's the birthday of modern Israel, May 14, 1948. Then all the hell broke loose, right? So the Arabs said, no, we don't declare, we don't recognize you. So there was the big war, 1947 and 1940 to 1949, the first Arab-Israel war. Almost all the Arab nations gathered and fought against Israel. This is again a crazy story which you will only see in the Bible. This small nation happens to win, right? And in that portion, as you can see, that was before the war, and that was later after the war. Before, Israel only had that blue part. Now after the war, Israel also has a little more purple area. So they not only defended themselves, they kind of won the war and took a lot of space from others, right? So Israel wins and capturing additional territories. Egypt had to lose Gaza. Jordan has to, so Jordan kind of controlled. This is again disputable. Many people say, no, Jordan never owned it. But the British, the way assigned it, they always considered West Bank as a trans-Jordan. They always assumed that Jordan would take care of it. But the Palestinians will say that's not right. That may not be right. But it's again, it's a matter of interpretation. But Israel has increased control on that area, right? But this is an important area that marked, that Palestinian called Nakba, I may not be pronouncing it right, which means catastrophe. And like I shared with you, what happened between India and Pakistan? That was a Nakba, that was a catastrophe where the Palestinian people, rightly so, I mean, it's innocent, it's painful experience. They were evicted out of their houses and they didn't know where to go. They were completely dispersed. A lot of them, rape, murder, pillaging, whatever you can imagine happened. You cannot say that didn't happen. You cannot say that the Palestinians were not persecuted. And that misery and that pain has to be acknowledged. Now, why that happened is where you connect the dot, and I'm not here to tell you that. You're smart people, you'll figure it out, right? So going back to, so the Nakba is still a painful thing for them in what happened in 1947 to 1949. Israel will say, we didn't do it, you guys did it. It's always the who started the war. That's always the issue, right? Who started the war, right? In this case, it's unfortunate, it's very clear the Arabs started the war. Now comes a little more tricky thing. Okay, before going there, you all know Yasser Arafat. He's a modern kind of folk hero in that part of the world. And if you don't, even if you don't know him, you know what he wears. Our college kids, really now it's a fashion statement in our own land. It is, I think it's called keffiyeh, which is essentially, you know, the Arabs wear that kind of things to protect themselves from the dust and the sun. You know, that's not uncommon. I used to live in Arab land. My wife was basically raised there, so we know how that works. But that particular design represents their rural origin. That really means that they are from a small village. They are from village. They are not the elite class. They are the ordinary people, or they call it Bedouins. Bedouins are another word for villagers, you know, kind of thing. So that shows the humility and simplicity. So that's what, you know, anyway, that's not the point. So Yasser Arafat is, like I said, is a modern kind of folk hero. He founded in the 1950s, he was in Cairo, Egypt, and so Palestinians, they don't have a home anymore, right? So they are basically dispersed. And so he was in Egypt, and he started forming resistance movement. In the 1950s, he formed a party called Fatah. Fatah is the acronym for PNLM, which is Palestine National Liberation Movement, I think. I might be wrong, but yeah, no, that's another one. So there are a lot of them. You'll come, there are a lot of them. So this is Fatah. This is Fatah as a party. He formed it. Then in the 1960s, he joined Fatah under another organization which you mean called PLO, which is Palestine Liberation Organization, right? PLO, right? Because PLO is an umbrella organization which kind of gathers all the resistance movement. Because this is the problem in that part of the world. Each tribe, each people group has their own resistance movement, right? Like, you know, so it's not like a nationalized movement or something like that. There was no social media to gather everybody. So PLO came about to gather all these movements, and Fatah party was under PLO, and eventually Yasser Arafat became the president of PLO, the higher body, and from 1969 to 2004, until he died, he was considered the president of PLO, and Fatah is a party under PLO, right? And what they were basically doing was organizing guerrilla attack against Israel from different parts of Arab countries. As you know, Israel is surrounded by, the only place they can be a little relief is the sea on one side. On the other side, you have Syria, you have Lebanon, you have Jordan, you have Egypt. So they will go to all these different Arab countries and organize guerrilla movement, because that's the only way they could do to regain their land. So that's the Yasser Arafat. We'll come to him in a minute. So here is another very interesting story. This is more disputed than anything you will hear here. So 1967, there is another war, right? It's called a 6-day war, right? June 5, 1967 to June 10, 1967, where Egypt and Syria and some other day, so this is depending on how you connect the dot. People say on one side, you say they organized a surprise attack on Israel, and Israel defeated them, which is true. Israel defeated them, that is true. But from Israeli version, they organized this attack and they fought against it and they destroyed them. But from their side, they say, we didn't do this. Israel started the war first. Again, who starts the war is very, very, very important in international court of justice, right? So Israel says that we already got secret information that Egypt is planning to attack us from south, and Syria is planning to attack us from north, and we should be smart enough. And they are right? Like if I am the Egyptian, if I am the Israel Prime Minister, if you're the American president, you get the news that Canada and Mexico are actually planning an attack against Israel. There is a conspiracy. They are going to attack on a specific time, same time. Canada will attack New York, and Mexico will attack Los Angeles. If I'm the smart American president, I will just do this before they even come here, right? I will attack Canada and Mexico first. So this is Israel's version, right? But the Arab countries' version, we didn't plan it. We were innocent. We were not thinking about any of this. So what Israel did was basically, it's funny. I mean, it's not funny. Sorry, it's a war. But they basically Israel went and destroyed their airports and everything. So their planes couldn't take off. So Israel got the news, according to them, that the Egypt is going to come with the bomb. So all their bombers are lined up. So they destroyed their airfield. They couldn't take off. And then Israel attacked. Anyway, it's a fascinating story, right? So in the 6-day war, Israel wins, right? Whether it is the disputed fact that who started the war and who is responsible for, but what ended up happening is Israel wins again, right? It doesn't matter which side here. Israel wins again, and now Egypt loses the Sinai Peninsula, that light blue part. Israel never had it, but now Israel got it. Israel got the control of that. And Syria also loses their part of Golan Heights, the northern part, right? So not only that loses the war, they also loses the territory, right? Some of that. So then, November 22, 1967, UN passes a resolution and say, hey, we had to talk about it. We had to decide. We had to have a solution. So Israel said, hey, we didn't attack first. They started it. And the Arab countries said, no, Israel started it. How do you resolve this, right? So UN passed this resolution. This is interesting. Resolution 242. This is called a land for peace deal. Basically, they said, UN said to Israel, hey, withdraw from this land slowly but surely for peace. If you want peace, withdraw. If you want peace from Egypt, give their land back. Don't talk about who was right and wrong. Give the land back, withdraw. If you want peace with Syria, give the Golan Heights back, withdraw, right? So this is essentially, my own version of a land for peace deal. But Israel said, there's no way we are going to do it because they don't even they don't even acknowledge our existence. See, that's the problem. See, there's a difference between India and Pakistan fighting against each other for a piece of land, but India will never say Pakistan doesn't exist. If India says that Pakistan doesn't have a right to exist, now we have escalated this into a completely different reality, right? So that is the problem here. So Israel said, well, land for peace deal. Okay, we are ready to do it, but they have to acknowledge our existence, that our right to exist. So this is, again, ongoing negotiation. No, but as you can see, Israel is getting more and more land. But this is, again, depending on where you are, you could also say that now Israel is occupying our land. This is where the word occupying comes from, right? Depending on where you look at. Yeah, you are suddenly in a particular territory. Now you lost the land. Now you're being occupied by Israel. Now Israel said, no, we rightfully deserve it because we won this war and we gained it. Again, I'm not going to be a moral judge here. So this happens. It's called Khartoum Resolution in 1967. The wake of this war, the Arab League Summit, all the Arab countries come together, and they decide this in Sudan, which is the capital of Khartoum is the capital of Sudan, and they declare these three things, as you can see: no peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no recognition of Israel. So this is the three no's. It's called the famous three no's. Now, I don't know what I will do as the leader of Israel. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not, but that's the state here, right? So, but eventually, the Arab states started getting tired of this. Arab states started withdrawing a little bit because the PLO because PLO is again hiding in Jordan or West Bank at the time, or again disputed, or they will go to Lebanon, or they will go to Syria, or they will go to Egypt and do the guerrilla attack. And as a result, Israel gets angry at Egypt and Syria, and finally they said, hey, you guys are creating a menace for us. We don't want to fight with Israel. Just leave us alone, right? Leave us alone. So Israel, most of the Arab countries suddenly started kind of pulling backward because they wanted peace too. They wanted to live their life. But the Palestinians are the people who are really suffering in the process because they are a people who are displaced. So they continued, and they took this into their own lands. So their own hands, and if you lived in the 70s and the 80s, and you probably know, there was a series of plane hijacking, and attack and guerrilla warfare by Yasser Arafat and PLO. And so again, who is right, who is wrong, depends on where you are standing, right? Now the next war you all familiar with, 1973. I don't know how many of you were here during the oil embargo, right? So this hit home, right? Up until that time, this is something happening elsewhere. So this is called Yom Kippur War, or also the Ramadan War, depending on where you are. Depending on where you are reading it from, a Jewish source or Al Jazeera source. It's also called Ramadan War. Apparently, it's kind of started coincide at that 1973. Again, Egypt and Syria wanted to retake their Sinai Peninsula. That's right, because they lost the Sinai, so they fought against Israel. They wanted that land back, rightfully so. If you ask me, depending on where you are. And then again, Syria wanted their land, so they did the attack again in 1973. It's an ambiguous thing, and the Arab countries said, we are not going to really fight with you guys, but we are going to declare an oil embargo to all the countries that support Israel, which included America. That's why in the 1973, part of the time you didn't have gas, and you were all stuck on the road because that was a retaliation by the Arab countries for the U.S. supporting Israel at that time. But eventually, nothing happened in that war. Nobody got anything. But eventually, Egypt regained Sinai in 1982, if I'm right. 1982, Sinai got Egypt, and Egypt would say that they liberated Sinai, and Jewish people say we gave it as part of a land for peace deal. It doesn't matter who says what, but it is with Egypt. Back home, everything is normal, at least on that front. But the Golan Heights is still there, with the Syrian territory still under the control of Israelis. And then Gaza, even at that time, was sort of part of Egypt, but eventually later, we'll come to that in a minute, around 2005, Israel disengaged from Gaza, which is another story for another time. But anyway, that war didn't really accomplish a lot of things, except that it hit Americans. The Americans probably remember that war more than any other war because of this, right? So the Yom Kippur War. Now, here is the most important part. This is the origin of Hamas. Right, now we have come to the real deal. So, right after all these things happened, there was two what we call intifadas. Intifada is the name for uprising, shake up, right? Resistance, like intifada, which is not very uncommon in that part of the world. So the first intifada was 1987 to 1993. And the second, this includes suicide bombing and many other things you read, right? And the second was 2000 to 2005. Now, during the first Intifada, 1987 to 1993, that is the time the Hamas, that's the origin of Hamas. It is an acronym for an Arabic word which really means the Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas. And it was started by a Muslim cleric, Sheikh Hamad Yassin. And he was a quadriplegic. That's why you can see his chair. He was always in his chair. So people are lifting his chair. That's his picture. I don't want to show his real picture. And they believe that jihad is the only way. Because what really happened by the time was that Yasser Arafat and PLO became a little more moderate. They realized that there is no way we can resolve this. There is no way, the guerrilla attack and killing each other is not a solution. So they finally, by the time in the 80s, they came to the conclusion that we should better go for the two-state solution, right? So they said, we can go for it. We are ready to acknowledge the existence of Israel, and we are ready to go to a pre-1967 border, if you are willing, and we are ready to take the land for peace deal. So the PLO became moderate. Yasser Arafat became a nice guy now suddenly. He became the ultimate picture of a shepherd, a Bedouin shepherd, a nice teacher and all that. Anyway, he toned down a little bit in that area. But this is exactly the spot Hamas took over. This was the right place for Hamas. Because there is always extreme faction, right? When your pastor goes a little mild on some issue, there will always be part of a congregation who wants to be gung-ho on that and create another faction. So whenever your leader goes soft on one issue, then there is another issue will come up, right? So anyway, maybe that was a bad metaphor. But coming back to, but that's why, that is the origin of Hamas. Because they thought Yasser Arafat is selling Palestinians, and he is being so soft, and he is being very pro-Jewish, and so the Sheikh Ahmad Yassin said jihad is the only way, and that's so they started intifadas and many other things, and eventually in 1997, U.S. declares Hamas as a terrorist organization. 1997, right? And a couple of important things to remember, like I said, PLO, which is Palestine Liberation Organization, now wants the two-state solution, which is fine, land for peace deal, they are okay, they are considering it. Now, 1988, right after Hamas started this in Gaza, so you have to remember, Pakistan and Bangladesh. You remember both sides. So these are two different places geographically. Gaza on one side and the West Bank on the other side, right? Both Palestine, but two different geographical entities, right? So on one side, the Gaza area is what Hamas is starting. Hamas started up. But in the meantime, the West Bank area is still under the control of Jordan. Jordan, the king, his name? Yeah, but the king of Jordan controls the West Bank, right? And so by 1988, he makes a move. He said, Jordan doesn't want this anymore. He surrenders the claim of the West Bank and he supports PLO. He supports that peace process. He said, I like Yasser Arafat. I like what PLO is doing. So I'm going to give this land back to, to the Jordan, back to PLO, and they can decide. So that's my act of solidarity. And he also wanted to get out of this mess, right? He didn't want to. All the Arab countries really wanted to get out of this mess. They didn't want to really get involved in, because it's a mess that will never be solved, as I said in the beginning. Coming back to, so these are some of the things happens, and that also catapulted this new movement of Hamas, right? It enabled them. So here is a very interesting thing that happened. In 1993 to 1995, something called Oslo Accords. There are a lot of peace negotiations, by the way, with America getting involved, starting with Jimmy Carter, and I think Bill Clinton was involved, George Bush was involved. A lot of American presidents came and negotiated peace. I can't describe all of them. But Oslo Accords, which happened in Oslo, Norway, right? Yeah. So that was very significant in 1993 and 1995. These are some of the outcomes. That is where the two-state solution finally became official. They said, okay, we will go for two-state solution. It's okay for Israel to exist. It's okay for the Arabs to exist as exist. So Palestine and Israel, that's okay. And the West Bank in particular was the area they wanted to divide this into controlled territory. There were 3 areas. They divided as A, B, and C. Area A means it's completely under Palestinian control. Area B means it's a joint control of Palestine and Israel. And Area C means it's completely controlled by Israel. So they came up with an amicable thing. But this again, there is fascinating documentaries on YouTube about Oslo Accord, how they decide. I mean, it's basically they are sitting in a room and drawing pictures in a piece of paper. How do we implement, right? It's much easier for me to say that, oh yeah, southern Pasadena belongs to Jewish people, or northern Pasadena belongs to Indian people, or something like that. But how do you implement these kind of things? It's much easier to say it than actually doing it. So they themselves admitted in that documentary. It's fascinating. So anyway, but at least it's such a big deal to make it official. Oslo Accord is considered one of the best things that happened in the whole process. And it so happened that Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, who was the prime minister of Israel at the time, and Shimon Peres, who was the foreign minister of Israel at the time, 3 of them combined won the Nobel Peace Prize. That was kind of cool because of the Oslo Accord, right? Now, here is the sad part. This happens 1993 to 1995, and 1995, somebody assassinates Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin dies, right? He is assassinated by a Jewish extremist. That's what the narrative goes. It's not the Palestinians went and killed him or anything like that. So he was assassinated. Everything fell apart. Then there were a series of other negotiations, and the Oslo Accord was saying that we will take by 1999, we will implement this area B and C and everything. But 1995 itself, it fell apart. There was many Camp David summit. You can read about it. There are a lot of things. It's not relevant to us. So everything went back to what it was before. So it didn't bear any fruit, right? And now second Intifada happens. Like I said, from the 2000 that era, Intifada again, people cross the boundaries and do suicide bombing and attack. And so Israel said they want to protect this their border, so they erect this wall between the West Bank and Israel. So this is again, I just showed that picture because that's again, people say, oh, Israel is building the wall against, yeah, Israel has the right to build a wall because they say they are trying to protect themselves. But on the other Palestinian side, I was watching a lot of documentaries in YouTube. One find that these walls were built just like that. It's not like our wall. It's just like that. And they say, one day, you're sitting in your home in Palestine, whether you're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, it doesn't matter. Then there is a wall right in front of your house. Then your grandkid or your kids and grandkids are on the other side. Nobody asked them, so it was not really well planned. So now to go to see your grandkid, you had to go through security check and all that. Anyway, because these are human issues, right? These are the catastrophe that is by human nature sins. But I just wanted to show you that picture. Now, coming to a close, I'm giving you too much information, but it is very, very important. One thing that really bothers me is that people make their opinion without knowing anything at all. If you say something stupid, but at least give a educated stupidity. That's what I'm saying. Seriously. People say from the river to the sea. Just answer the question: which is the river? Just name the river. That's all you want to do. Many people don't know that. Which is the sea? I'm just asking the basic information, right? So it's now, since you have this information, now you can make your conclusion. You can be an anti-Semite if you want. You can do whatever. That's up between you and God. No, I'm not recommending that. But I'm saying that you make your decision. You pay for your decision. I'm not here to tell you this way or that way. But at least make that educated decision. That's why I'm giving you this information. So here is this is the coup of Palestine in 2007. This is very interesting. By 2006, now again picture, this is Israel. On one side you have West Bank, on the other side you have Gaza. They are both Palestine, under Palestine brand, and right in the middle is Israel. Again, picture India, one side Bangladesh, one side Pakistan. East and West, but they are still kind of the same regime, right? Now, West Bank is more controlled by Fatah party. PLO, Yasser Arafat, and they have more control in West Bank. Okay? And Gaza is where 1987 the Hamas started their movement. That is an extreme organization, right? Like, so they are declared as terrorists. So you have these two different parties, two different factions, and 2006 they decided to form, to do an actual election combining the two. And so there is a unity government. They call it the Palestine Authority. It's a combination of Gaza and West Bank, which is in two different sides of Israel. They said, we are going to form an entity called Palestine Authority, PA. And there we will have a Palestine Legislative Council. Let's do an election. Now, in that year, in 2006, they do the election. Who wins the majority? Hamas does. PLO does up until that time. PLO is the party. PLO is almost connected because of Yasser Arafat. You know, he's the leader, right? So up until that was a shocking thing that happened in 2006. Hamas won the election. Now Hamas has to form the government. Hamas was excited to form the government. But here is the problem. America considers Hamas a terrorist organization, which means no other country is going to recognize their legitimacy of that government. So there is an internal rift between Hamas and Fatah. Fatah says, even though you won it, US or any other country is going to recognize you, so let us form the government. Let us be the front person. Hamas said, no, we won the election. Yeah, both are right, right? Again, here is another internal rift, right? So they formed the government in 2006 and then dissolved the government in 2007. You know, it didn't really happen. Actually, by December, I guess, the exact date matter. It didn't even function, that government. But that made an important issue that is still the major issue that we are facing today. 2007 is the year which solidified the division between West Bank as Fatah party and Gaza as the Hamas party, right? Gaza in Hamas and West Bank Fatah. Now that division became crystallized in 2007. That was the thing. So that's why it's called coup of Palestine by Hamas, or they call it the Hamas takeover of Gaza. Yeah, Hamas doesn't have a lot of control on West Bank, but Gaza, they control. They control Gaza. So that is an important event that happened. And that split between Fatah and Hamas, which is sort of the moderate faction and the extreme faction, which became very permanent in 2007. But then again, you know, Israel attacked Gaza in 2008, you know, because Gaza attacked Israel. That's what they say. Again, this is a narrative that now Israel's real pain point is Gaza, because the extremists are in Gaza. West Bank is kind of another story for another time, right? Like they are not really worried about rockets coming from West Bank, but Gaza, it can. So Israel continued to keep Gaza under control. So 2008, you can see all this attack. And then Hamas joining with Hezbollah, that's another party I didn't even mention. You know, that's another story. All the extremists now started coming together, and then Israel engaged in war there. And here is another almost kind of comical thing. Yeah, I shouldn't say that, but another failed attempt to form another unity government. So in 2014 June, this is what I meant. 2014 June, they decided to form another unity government between Fatah and Hamas. They shook hands and as Palestine, let's unite. And then what happened? They formed this unity government in June. It fell apart in December. So it just only stayed for 6 months. So that was a failed attempt again. Now comes to some of the things that happened. These are contemporary events. Donald Trump takes the office and he makes a series of moves. 2017, US recognized Jerusalem as capital. Everybody got shocked, but he did that. And then 2019, Golan Heights, again, was Golan Heights. You remember the Syrian territory, which after the war, Israel occupied, or they took it, whichever way you want to say it. And but everybody laid claim. You know, we say Israel said we own it, but they say they own it. You know, this is not as simple as our state governments or federal government operate. These are all very muddied, clouded fact in that part of the world, right? So anyway, but U.S. formally said that Golan Heights is part of Israel territories. Then 2020, Trump came up with that peace accord. Basically he gave a peace plan, but the Palestinians complained that he didn't even consult with us, so we will not obey to the peace plan. But peace plan was essentially going back to the Oslo Accord and two-state solution, and nothing magical about it. He basically wanted to reinstate where we were before. Not that I'm picking a side, but Palestinians were offended because they were not consulted. So they said we will not obey it, but Israel said we will obey it, and Israel started implementing on one side of it because here is the American government, give us a peace plan, we will do it. And then a big thing he did was an Abraham Accord, right? That's a momentous thing, at least from a theological perspective. September 15, 2020, Bahrain and UAE became the first nation to basically sit with Israel and say, we are all children of Abraham, whether it's Muslims or Jews, the Arabs or Israelis, we are all children of Abraham. So he brought a theological twist to the whole thing. Abraham Accord was signed, then followed by Morocco and Sudan joined in that peace accord, which was something, when you consider the whole story, what we heard, that was kind of a fresh breath of air, whichever way you want to look at it. But it says a theological twist right there. But again, peace is, like I said, I love everybody, but it's not going to happen. Happen again, 2021, clash at Al-Aqsa Mosque, around 200 people died, Gaza. Not a lot of people read about it. And then they saw 2022, year 2022 was the deadliest year in Israel counterterrorism and, the Israel-Gaza thing. That's what they say. It was the deadliest year. A lot of people died. We didn't really notice. But we noticed when this happened. So 2023, October 7, that the latest attack, I'm sure I don't have to explain this to you. That didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like we heard and we were shocked. But it was brewing in 2022, it was brewing in 2021, and it was brewing right from 1910, somewhere early 1900, right? So this is kind of the story of like a geopolitical story of Israel. I just wanted to give, and just one last slide. So this is Al Jazeera. Again, Al Jazeera's basically, they want to look at us as this used to be, according to them, was Israel, the land of Palestine, which was a major Arab country, according to them. And there was only 6% or less Jewish population. But as you can see, the Jewish immigration happens, and then separate land, the two-state solution or the Peel Commission happens, and the Israel independence happens, and then the 1967 war happens. So the border gets expanded and expanded. Now they accuse that Israel is taking more and more space in West Bank or Western Gaza. So that's why the word occupying kind of comes from. Again, it depends on which side of the history you are on, whether it's occupying, whether they rightfully own it. So who owns the land is the major question. So this is what we will be talking about next week. I call it the theology of the land. So this was just the geopolitical issue. I don't have much to say to you about. We have around 10 minutes to ask questions. I'll try to answer whatever questions you ask, but this is just the background information. I just gave you some ingredients, right? Now you need to cook this information, these ingredients, under the fire, right? Now the fire is what the theology of the land. When you look at this, you can look at it from the Israel. This is the Arab way of looking at it. Because like I said, I wanted to show you what Al Jazeera thinks, right? And that's the Arab way of looking at it. Israeli way of looking at could be very different, their perspective. The same way, the Republicans and Democrats might look at this from a very different way. Whether you are the political left or political right, you might be looking at from left or right. But what we are supposed to look at it from above. above, right? That's where the theology is very important. I already gave you a little bit of the foundational theology in the last week, but next week we will go to the theology of the land. Here is the one thing I want you have a homework next week. This will be one of the most painful homework I've ever given to anybody, and this is to read the book of Joshua. Read the book of Joshua cover to cover. Read it like a story. Don't try to study it. Just read it. But I want you to read it like a modern American. I want you to read it like you are not a Christian. I know it's hard. Pretend that you're not a Christian. And I want you to feel the rage and what's happening and how do you justify some of the things that is happening, right? The book of Joshua. That's where it all started, right? The conquest. That's where it all started. So we are going to talk about the theology of the land next week. 10 minutes. Asbeth has a microphone. Anybody has a question?